The iron levers scream, the gears grind like breaking bone, and inside the suffocating heat of a 26-ton tomb, a seamstress is clutching the controls of death. This wasn't a weapon issued by the state. It was a private vendetta, bought with every silver spoon and scrap of furniture a widow owned. How did a woman discarded by a military monolith manage to purchase her way into the most lethal tank corps on Earth? It wasn't just a donation. It was a down payment on a massacre. A billion-ruble war machine, blinded by its own rigid manual, surrendered to a woman who spent her life sewing buttons only because she was the only one willing to pay for the steel and blood. The generals saw a propaganda puppet, but the woman in the oil-stained hatch was already counting the bodies. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. August 1941, Tomsk, Siberia. The air in the apartment is thin, tasting of dust and the faint metallic tang of the nearby factories. Mariah is 36. In the brutal economy of the Soviet Union at war, 36 is the twilight of utility. She is a telephone operator, a seamstress, a worker of the rear. To the state, she is a statistic meant to provide the calories and the clothes for the men who actually fight. Then there is a knock at the door. The telegram is a small, unremarkable slip of paper. It has traveled across thousands of miles of blood-soaked earth, arriving 2 years after the lead found its mark. Her husband, Ilya, was a regimental commissar. He was slaughtered during the Nazi advance near Kiev in 1941. The state has been efficient with its silence. For 700 days, Mariah lived in a ghost's shadow, writing letters that were never read, dreaming of a man who was already a part of the Ukrainian soil. The notification doesn't just deliver news of death. It delivers a pension and a cold invitation to continue her noble labor for the motherland. The Soviet system expects a specific reaction, a period of mourning, a quiet sob in the factory line, and a renewed devotion to the 5-year plan. They expect her to weep. They expect her to work. And eventually, they expect her to fade. But Mariah doesn't weep. She looks at the official ink on the paper, and she sees a balance sheet that has not been settled. The Soviet military machine is a monolith of standard procedure. It is a system designed to consume millions of individuals and produce a single, unified victory. In the eyes of the high command, Ilya was a lost asset, a replaceable part in a machine that spanned 11 time zones. But Maria understands a different kind of physics. She begins to strip her life bare. First, the furniture goes, the heavy oak tables, the chairs that held the memories of Sunday dinners. Then, the clothes, the dresses she wore when the world was at peace. Finally, she sells her bedding. Every scrap of a life she no longer recognizes is converted into rubles. While the neighbors whisper about the widow who has lost her mind, Maria is performing a cold forensic liquidation. She spends months in the state-run workshops, working double shifts, her eyes fixed on a number, 50,000 rubles. In 1943, that isn't just a fortune. It is the literal price of a T-34 tank. She gathers the cash, a heavy stained bag of paper that represents the sum total of her existence, and she walks into the regional military recruitment office. The room is gray, smelling of stale tobacco and the arrogance of middle management. A Soviet major sits behind the desk, his uniform tight against a frame that hasn't seen the front in years. He looks at the middle-aged woman standing before him, and he doesn't see a soldier. He sees a civilian who has wandered into the wrong room. "Go back to the factory, comrade," he says, his voice flat, practiced. "The state provides the weapons. Your job is to provide the labor. We follow the manual. The manual does not have a section for widows buying tanks." He treats the regulations as an unbreakable law of nature. He believes the system is too rigid, too vast, to bend for the whims of a grieving seamstress. He offers a representative quote of the era's hubris. "The Red Army is not a marketplace. We do not trade steel for the tears of women." But Maria has spent years navigating the silence of the state. She knows that in a system of total control, you do not argue with the teeth of the machine. You speak to the brain. While the major returns to his paperwork, convinced he has dismissed a nuisance, Maria is already crafting a letter. It is not a plea for mercy. It is a tactical proposal addressed to the only man whose word can shatter the manual, Joseph Stalin. She writes with a precision that defies her lack of formal military training. She tells him she has the 50,000 rubles. She tells him she wants the T-34. But she embeds a fatal flaw in the state's usual propaganda. She will not donate the tank to a crew of strangers. She poses a paradox. If the Soviet Union truly values the total mobilization of its people, how can it refuse a citizen who offers everything, her wealth, her labor, and her life, to become the weapon itself? She demands that the tank be named Boyevaya Podruga, the fighting girlfriend, and she demands to be the one in the driver's seat. Stalin, a man who views the world as a series of images to be manipulated, sees the potential. A widow seeking vengeance is a story that can burn through the front lines faster than an artillery shell. Stalin's signature didn't grant her a career. It granted her a target on her back. To the local commissars, she wasn't a soldier. She was an administrative error that needed to be erased. During her training in the Urals, she is treated as a saboteur of military order. Every time she touches the iron levers, she is technically committing an act of treason against the standard operating procedure. The instructors don't just mock her. They sabotage her machine, hoping the grandmother will die in a mechanical accident before she ever reaches the front. She is driving a 26-ton weapon she isn't legally cleared to fire, under the constant threat of a gulag sentence for misuse of state property. She isn't training for war. She is surviving an internal execution. They expect to put her through a few weeks of ceremonial training, take some photographs, and then keep her far from the real heat of the engine. They believe she is a symbol. They have no idea she is a hunter. While the establishment laughed at the grandmother with the checkbook, Maria was already in the shadows of the training grounds, holding the silence that would eventually scream across the plains of Belarus. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. September 1943. Nizhny Tagil. In the shadow of the Ural Mountains, the world is made of iron and oil. This is the heart of the Soviet forge, a city-sized factory where the T-34 is birthed at a rate of 1 every 30 minutes. The air here doesn't just smell of coal, it tastes of burnt metal. The Red Army High Command arrives with cameras and notebooks. They are here for the photo op, the patriotic widow in her pristine tanker's leather. They expect to show her how to start the engine, let her drive in a straight line for the newsreels, and then tuck her away in a logistics unit where she can be safe for the rest of the war. But the training ground is not a film set, and Maria is not an actress. She stands before her T-34, the Boyevaya Podruga, the fighting girlfriend. To the young recruits half her age, the tank is a magnificent beast. To the engineers, it is a triumph of geometry. But to the driver, it is a sensory deprivation chamber designed by a sadist. The T-34's steering isn't a wheel. It is a pair of brutal iron levers. To move them, you don't just pull, you fight. It is like trying to wrench a frozen tree stump out of the earth with your bare hands. Every single time you want to turn. The fatal flaw of the machine is its internal environment. There is no power steering, no synchronization in the gearbox. To shift from second to third gear, a driver often has to use a wooden mallet to bash the lever into place, while their foot crushes a clutch pedal that requires 50 pounds of pressure. If you miss the timing, the gears don't just grind. They scream like a dying animal, and the tank stalls, leaving you a stationary target in a field of fire. The instructors watch her with a practiced, cynical pity. They wait for her muscles to fail. They wait for the moment she realizes that vengeance is a heavy burden for a 36-year-old woman. During the first week, a senior lieutenant, a man whose face is a map of scars, stops her as she climbs out of the hatch, her face blackened by exhaust and grease. He looks at her trembling hands, the hands of a seamstress now blistered and raw. He offers the crystallized arrogance of the professional soldier. "You have done your part, comrade. You bought the steel. Let a man drive it before you break your spirit on these levers. A tank does not care about your heart. It only cares about strength." Maria wipes the oil from her brow, leaving a dark streak across her temple. She doesn't look at him with anger. She looks through him. "The tank does not know who is pulling the lever," she says. "It only knows if the lever is pulled. Watch me." While the rest of the camp sleeps, the fighting girlfriend is seen moving through the mud in the moonlight. Maria is not just learning to drive, she is learning to listen. She begins to understand the vibration of the tracks, the specific cough of the V2 diesel engine when the fuel lines are clogging, the smell of hot oil that signals a friction plate is about to seize. She becomes the Yoda ghost in the machine. While the young men boast of their bravery in the mess hall, Maria stays in the dark, performing the quiet, mechanical maintenance that keeps a tank alive. She treats the 26-ton hull not as a tool, but as a partner. October 1943, the plains of Belarus. The 26th Tank Brigade moves westward. The landscape is a graveyard of charred villages and skeletal trees. The German Wehrmacht, though retreating, is far from defeated. They are a wounded predator, dug into the earth with 88mm anti-tank guns that can unzip a T-34 from a mile away. The German officers, peering through their Zeiss optics, see the words Boyevaya Podruga painted in bold white Cyrillic across the turret. They laugh. They have heard the Soviet radio broadcasts about the grieving widow. They treat the tank as a curiosity, a piece of clumsy propaganda. They believe the silence of the Soviet line is a sign of hesitation. They believe the fighting girlfriend is a soft target. But they have fatally underestimated their opponent. It isn't a joke, it's a vendetta. Maria is supposed to stay in the second echelon. Those are her orders. She is meant to be the reserve. But when the first shells begin to crater the earth around them, something in her snaps. The 2 years of waiting, the empty apartment in Tomsk, the cold ink of the death notice. It all funnels into her right foot. She slams the mallet into the gear lever. The fighting girlfriend roars, a cloud of black soot belching from the rear as she surges past the commanding officer's tank. The yes but of the battlefield begins to take hold. She breaks through the first line of German trenches, crushing the machine gun nests under her tracks, but the victory exposes her. She is now ahead of her support, a lone iron box in a sea of gray uniforms. The air inside the turret is a toxic soup of cordite and diesel fumes. The noise is a physical weight, a hammer hitting the skull with every vibration. Maria can see almost nothing. The driver's vision slit is a narrow letterbox of chaos. She navigates by the feel of the terrain through her seat and the muffled screams of the intercom. Suddenly, a shudder. The tank lurches to the left. A German shell has clipped the drive sprocket. It didn't pierce the armor, but it did something worse. It jammed the track. In a standard engagement, this is the end. A tracked tank is a sitting duck. The crew is supposed to wait for the infantry to clear the area before attempting repairs. To step outside is to invite 100 Mauser rounds into your chest. The sergeant in the turret screams for her to stay down. But Maria knows the math of the front. If they sit still, the next shell won't hit the track. It will hit the fuel tank. She doesn't wait for permission. She doesn't follow the protocol. While the German infantry begins to swarm the propaganda tank, believing they are about to capture a trophy, the hatch swings open. A woman climbs out into the storm of lead. She isn't carrying a rifle. She is carrying a sledgehammer and a spare track link. The German gunners don't stare in awe. They stare in a sickening, stunned humiliation. Their elite tactical manuals have no chapter for this. In the Soviet command bunker, the silence is even louder and more shameful. The officers watch through binoculars as the woman they tried to break does the one thing their professional crews are too terrified to attempt. They don't cheer. They don't applaud. They look at the floor, their faces burning with the realization that their entire military hierarchy has been outclassed by a seamstress with a sledgehammer. When the shell finally finds her, the officers feel a dark, unspoken relief. If she dies, their embarrassment dies with her. If she lives, she is a living, breathing insult to their rank. She is ignoring the hammer of the German army because she has a hammer of her own. The rivets fly. The track clicks back into place. Maria scrambles back into the hull just as the first grenades bounce off the sloped armor. She slams the tank into reverse, her eyes fixed on the German line. She isn't just surviving, she is hunting. By the time the sun sets over the Belarus marshes, the fighting girlfriend has destroyed 3 machine gun positions and a self-propelled gun. The woman the generals laughed at has become the most lethal driver in the brigade. But the fighting girlfriend has a price. The more she wins, the more the system relies on her. the more she proves her efficiency, the deeper into the fire they send her. She has become a symbol that the state can no longer afford to lose. And yet, she is the only one who refuses to stay in the rear. She is chasing a ghost, and the ghost is leading her toward a village called Švéky. The directors of the war dismissed her as a budget-friendly headline. They believed her story would end with a medal and a retirement to a quiet village. But the front respects no narratives. While they toasted her success in Moscow, a new mechanical reality, the true master of the Eastern Front, was preparing to remind them that in the collision between the human spirit and the system, the steel always gets the last word. January the 17th, 1944. Švéky, Belarus. The village doesn't exist anymore. It is a collection of blackened chimneys standing like skeletal fingers against a sky the color of a bruised lung. The winter here isn't just cold. It is a physical weight, a silent thief that steals the breath from your lungs and the heat from your blood. The Red Army is launching a night raid. In the darkness, the T-34s are invisible predators, identified only by the blue flames licking from their exhaust pipes. At the tip of the spear is the Boyevaya Podruga. Mariah is driving with a ferocity that has begun to unsettle her own commanders. She isn't just advancing, she is hunting for the ghosts of the men who took her life away in 1941. Then, the world turns white. A German anti-tank shell, fired from a concealed position, screams through the dark. It doesn't pierce the hull, but it finds the fatal flaw of the machine's mobility. It strikes the left drive sprocket with the force of a falling mountain. A tank's track is a series of steel teeth held together by tension and friction. When a shell severs a single link, the entire system unzips. The 26-ton machine doesn't just stop. It founders like a wounded whale in the shallows. The engine roars, the right track spins uselessly, digging a grave in the frozen mud, and the fighting girlfriend becomes a stationary target. The crystallized arrogance of the German gunners is audible in the sudden pause. They know the rules of engagement. They know that no sane crew exits a disabled tank under the sweep of machine gun fire. They wait for the hatch to open in surrender, or for the next shell to turn the steel box into an oven. But the crew doesn't surrender, and Mariah doesn't wait. In the turret, her commander is screaming over the intercom, ordering her to stay down. But Mariah hears a different frequency, because she was a seamstress, a woman who spent decades understanding that a single broken stitch can unravel an entire garment. She sees the problem differently than the experts. To the officers, it is a mechanical failure. To Mariah, it is a tear in the fabric of her vengeance that must be mended. She kicks the hatch open. The cold hits her like a physical blow, but she doesn't flinch. She slides out of the driver's seat and onto the frozen earth of Švéky. The air is alive with the wisp of snipers' bullets and the heavy thud of mortar fire. Time freezes. She is kneeling in the mud, her back to the German lines. She can smell the hot, scorched metal of the damaged sprocket. She can feel the vibration of the earth as the enemy closes in. She isn't a symbol of the state anymore. She isn't a widow. She is a mechanic of the soul, hammering a steel pin into the heavy treads with a rhythmic, deafening precision. clang, clang, clang. While the establishment's war machine screams in panic around her, Maria is in the dark, holding the silence. The track clicks. The tension returns. The stitch is mended. She begins to pull herself back toward the hatch. She is inches from the safety of the iron. Then, the hammer falls. A German shell lands just meters away. It doesn't hit the tank. It hits the earth. The explosion doesn't just throw her. It sends a jagged piece of the Belarusian soil, frozen as hard as shrapnel, straight into her temple. For a moment, there is only silence. Then, the steel screams as the tank surges back into the fight. Maria stays in a coma for 2 months. She lingers on the edge of the world, a woman who bought her way into history, only to find that the price was everything she had left. On March 15th, 1944, the fighting girlfriend officially loses its driver. The bitter aftertaste of her victory is written in the medals that follow. Maria Oktyabrskaya becomes the first female tank driver to be named a hero of the Soviet Union. The state that ignored her, the officers who mocked her, and the manual that tried to bar her, they all claim her now. They turn her into a statue. They put her face on stamps. They use her name to recruit more cogs for the machine. They celebrate the hero, but they forget the woman who had to sell her bed just to be heard. Maria Oktyabrskaya didn't buy a tank to save the world. She bought it to exit a world that had already decided she was worthless. Today, the state still loves the image of the fighting girlfriend. They put her face on postage stamps. They build bronze statues to her unwavering patriotism, carefully scrubbing away the uncomfortable truth that they tried to stop her at every single turn. It is the ultimate corporate lie, a system that breaks a human being, then spends a fortune marketing that victim's resilience as a success story for the brand. We see this same mirror reflecting our society today. We see it in every modern bureaucracy that ignores the warnings until the disaster is unavoidable, only to claim the survivors' courage as their own tactical triumph. Maria's true legacy isn't the gold star pinned to a heavy coat. It is a cold iron realization that the system will only ever truly love you. Once you have become a ghost, it can finally control. Her story remains a jagged reminder that sometimes the only way to be heard by a monolith is to buy your way in, drive through the fire, and leave a scar so deep that history has no choice but to remember your name. If you believe that stories like Maria Oktyabrskaya's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing. To help us continue uncovering the truths that power tried to bury, your support is our fuel. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.